Thanks for having me. Again, Mark, thanks for the invitation. You probably heard from the introduction. My name is Youngmoo Kim. I have the great privilege of being the director of the Excite Center at Drexel University, and I'll explain what all that means very shortly. I'd like to talk about how we bring together STEAM along with tech research, learning science, and civic engagement to lead our initiatives in for inclusive development in a very, very different way, I think, than is typical from an academic perspective at other universities. So we're based here in Philadelphia. And if you may know something or maybe not so familiar with Philadelphia, I'll just tell you just a tiny little bit. It is an incredibly diverse city. It is the 6th largest in the country. So it's a large city. And the population is growing. It is certainly a city that's expanding, and it's a city of great opportunity. It's very diverse. It is a majority people of color, person of color city. 42% of the population in Philadelphia is Black. 41%, or a little under 41%, is white, and then the rest are also various people of color. The city also faces some enormous challenges, as do many urban centers. The particular challenge that we face is poverty. That the poverty rate at Philadelphia goes up and down a little bit, but it hovers around 25%, which means that 1 in 4 Philadelphians actually lives at or below poverty, which is astounding. Now that's the city limits, that's not including the metropolitan area, but still, it's a very, very oppressing and a daunting challenge. So our university is right in the heart of Philadelphia, an area called University City. So we're actually in West Philadelphia born and raised, if you're a Fresh Prince fan, like many of us are. But it's a large university, 22,000 students, 14 colleges and schools. Drexel is particularly known for its cooperative education program, or co-op, meaning that all of our undergraduates, in addition to taking classes, go on extended work internships, 6 months at a time. And so by the time they graduate, they've mixed in academic and work experiences so that they're hopefully even better prepared to join the workforce afterwards. And certainly our graduation rates and our statistics bear that out. We did sort of make a transition about 40 years ago from being primarily a commuter school to being mostly a residential college and residential university. And we are a comprehensive university. I mean, we're very large. We did achieve R1 research status, meaning that we're in the top tier of research institutions in the country. And that's a fairly recent recognition for us. But key to this presentation and my presentation is that it's also in a part of the city that borders on some of the most underserved neighborhoods in Philadelphia, something that we call the Promise Zone. And of course, I'll define that for you in a second. So here's Philadelphia, there's Drexel. Hopefully you can see that. The little dragon, it's our mascot. The dragon's the heart of our campus. And then this area is what we call the Promise Zone. It's several square miles. It is the neighborhoods of Pelton Village, Mantua, and a bit of West Philadelphia. And this was actually a federal designation that we helped put together. We pushed for and working with others in the city to attain. And that's a designation that was given by the White House, previous administration, to regions that face persistent challenges due to economic conditions, persistent poverty, persistently low education attainment. So that just helps bring a little more attention and probably a little more context to our location and our area. This is just a shot from my drive in on most days. This is typical residential area of the Promise Zone. And again, there are some areas that are, probably facing even more challenged conditions. I'll show you one of those in a second. But all of this is now located in the shadow of a growing and rapidly developing area around our campus and the University of Pennsylvania, this University City area. So, just residents who have been in the Promise Zone for sometimes for their entire lives, generations in fact, are seeing this massive expansion. And one of the key points of our efforts is that we don't view this development, this expansion, as gentrification. We can't allow that to happen. that this is not development that is just going to simply push people in different economic circumstances further and further away. We have to develop in a way that's going to be as inclusive as possible. And of course, I'll talk about some ways that we are pursuing that. So the Promise Zone is a pretty large area, several square miles. This is one of the, well, this corner is one of the premier schools in the area. It's the McMichael Elementary School. It's a public school. You can see that on the wall of it. It's sort of hidden behind the Zoom window. Sorry about that. There's a mural there that's actually part of our city's wonderful mural arts program, where they do paint these fantastic commissioned artists to design and then implement these fantastic murals all around the city. So the McMichael School is actually covered on all sides by this mural that's a tribute to science and to STEAM in particular, which is one of the reasons I love it. But what you can also see in this photo is just across the street that there are some vacant buildings and abandoned lots, right? Which is also fairly typical of this neighborhood, this region. So the stats for the Promise Zone, again, are pretty daunting. 46% at or below the poverty rate, almost 1 in 2. A very high unemployment rate, especially when compared to the country and the rest of the city. A fairly low high school graduation rate. We're talking about a third do not graduate from high school. Several thousand families and a large number of youth, a very young population in these couple of neighborhoods. So this is right adjacent to our campus. I mean, in fact, our campus is part of this Promise Zone. So, the biggest, one of the biggest questions that we face, how can we be pursuing this agenda of development and innovation and research and all the things that, seem to point towards economic growth and look the other way from what's happening right in our backyard here. So I think one of the things I'm most proud of, and I think is most distinctive about our university, it is a private institution, by the way, it's not a public institution, but with our current president, John Fry, oh great, that may be blocked, I'll read the whole quote to you. When he was inaugurated in 2010, he came in with this tremendous vision. And he said, my aspiration for Drexel is for it to be the most civically engaged university in the United States, right? So again, for primarily a private institution that had focused mostly on technical fields, engineering, sciences, right? I think this was an extraordinary recognition and an extraordinary declaration. So we take this challenge very, very seriously, and it really shifted the course of not just the university, but certainly the work of myself and many of my colleagues to respond to this challenge. So I want to tell you a little bit about that work, get into a little more detail on how I think that it really is cross-cutting and linking, trying to draw this direct line between tech innovation, STEAM education, and civic engagement. These all come together. Anyone who knows me, like my students in the center here, will tell one of my favorite phrases, everything is connected. Right, that we can't just do work on these things in isolation, especially in a dense city environment. We have to work together and bring these things into concentration. So let me just give you a little bit of the timeline here. I mean, 2010 was when John Fry came in as our president, made this declaration. Over the next 4 or 5 years, here are some big milestones that happened right at Drexel and of course in the adjoining neighborhoods. I mean, I mentioned the Promise Zone. That declaration was actually achieved in 2014. In between there, I mean, one of the first things that was established under John Fry's presidency was a new office, an Office of University and Community Partnerships, because to then lead, to spearhead this vision of civic engagement. Now, historically, right, if we went back further in the timeline, I could tell you that the relationship between the neighborhoods and communities adjoining Drexel with the university had not been a good one, had not been positive. We can talk about and point to decades and decades of, at best, indifference, and at worst, downright hostility between the university and the neighborhoods. So we kind of planted this flag in the ground and established this office that we have to turn this around. It's not going to happen right overnight. It's not just going to be declared, oh, we're civically engaged now. No, it's going to have to be, the proof will be in our actions, in our doing. So that was one of the first things that was established. My center was also established through the first strategic plan of John Frye's presidency, the Excite Center, which I'll initially describe as a tech and innovation center, right? But again, I'll get into how we connect more specifically with the Office of University Community Partnerships and some of the other efforts. And another initiative that started early on was a recognition that early childhood education, particularly in the Promise Zone, was severely lacking. Just the options, the opportunities, the providers, they were not plentiful. And so that was something that needed to be addressed. And so we established this initiative called West Philly Action for Early Learning. And then the kind of capping off this period was the establishment of an actual physical site, a center, a community center. We believe it's the first private university extension center in the community. It's about 5 blocks off of our campus, and it's called the Dornsife Center, the Dornsife Center for Neighborhood Partnerships. It's an old historic mansion that the university then procured and then renovated to become this community center. The idea of an extension center, just in case you're not familiar, descends from the original public universities, the land grant institution. So we're talking about, the universities, Texas A&M and University of Illinois and the big schools who then had a mission to sort of take their knowledge and extend that back into the communities, particularly in farming and agricultural communities. Right, so that's a lot of where the initial efforts in university extension happened. 4-H, 4-H clubs and the 4-H initiatives were actually part of that movement. We wanted to rethink this for what does it mean to be an urban extension center. So we created this, this location, the Dornsife Center, which provides not just a building and a meeting space, but programming. So within the Dornsife Center, Drexel staffs, digital literacy efforts, a health and wellness hub, a legal clinic for those who need legal assistance, particularly around real estate and eviction. We provide, also for criminal background clearances and record expungement. There's a community gardens. There's a dance studio. You can see the great photo from one of the dance classes that's held there. There's actually a music production studio there now. So it is, not the only bridge, but one of the main focal points that bridges between the university and the community. All services, all programs are free of charge to neighborhood residents. And then one of the great highlights, and I attend many of these, is once a month they host a big community dinner that all, it's free for all, but that both members of the neighborhood and the community, and as well as university personnel, faculty, staff, students will attend. And so it's a great chance just to get to know people in the area. So we think that's a pretty unique effort, and I'll come back to how our work integrates right into the Dornsife Center in just a little bit. So that was the Dornsife Center. I'm going to zoom in. Hopefully you can see this. By the way, tell me, just holler or maybe text me or shoot me something in the messaging if for some reason the video isn't coming through correctly. Let's see, the Excite Center is there and the Dornsife Center is there. So we're just, 5 blocks away, pretty much, about 10-minute walk, maybe 12-minute walk between the two. Okay, so now I told you a little about the Dornsife Center, and now I'm going to tell you about the Excite Center and then link these two things together. So the Excite Center is this institute that I started in 2013. Excite actually stands for something. It stands for Expressive and Creative Interaction Technologies. So really it is this hub for technology, the arts, design, and creative expression. Okay, so I don't know if this will come through correctly. It's okay, you don't really need to know the details here. These are just some examples of projects that we have undertaken at the Excite Center. I've done dance performances with drones. It's terrifying, please don't ever do it. I've done it so nobody else has to. I took years off my life. We've built systems for the Philadelphia Orchestra. That's what's in the upper right, a smartphone-based system so you can kind of follow along with the performance, with the score as it's happening. We've put video games on skyscrapers. That's on the lower right. That was a project that's actually world record, the largest video game display in history. There's a wonderful skyscraper just a few blocks away from us called the Sierra Center, and it's covered with LEDs, an LED pixel array. So you can put low resolution graphics up there. So we put Tetris on the building, and actually both sides. So it's competitive Tetris. It turns video games into this really interactive piece of public art. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience, I think, for the entire city to share in. And then we do crazy things with robots. So that's what's on the bottom left. We have, you know, some of our humanoid robots, and they're performing, and we put together a music video around that. So these are just some examples of the kind of, you know, tech-inspired innovation projects that we pursue. Again, almost always at the boundary between technology and the arts. I am an alum of the MIT Media Lab, so there's certainly a flavor of that, a spirit of that in the work that we pursue. I don't know if the sound will play in this one or not. If it doesn't, it's okay. It's not that big a deal. But this is, I'll just let it play for about 30 seconds so you can see.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Whoa.
So we do crazy performances and build, you know, arts tech projects like that. This was the reason I want to highlight this. This sort of started a new process for us of co-design in starting to work with artists and, well, start collaborations with artists and technologists from a blank slate. Prior to this, we would often do a lot of technical work, build some technology, then bring in collaborators towards the end of a project. This was one where we brought in artists in residence, and then again, didn't have a particular goal or outcome we were going for, just to create something new. And I think that informs many of our efforts in a lot of different fields since then. So what does this crazy arts tech stuff have to do with civic engagement, and particularly inclusive civic engagement? Well, everything we do is based on this foundation of STEAM. And I'm sure you're very familiar. Hold on, I'm just trying to move this thing out of the way. Oh, well, I can't see the cursor. Sorry for the technical issues here. STEAM is in the foundation of everything that we do, both in our research and certainly our education and outreach efforts as well. In fact, we do host an annual STEAM education workshop for the Philadelphia region. That is on Monday, this coming Monday. So we're obviously doing some prep work for that as well. If you happen to be in Philadelphia, please come check it out. This will be our 6th annual such gathering. But you know, it's a way of connecting, you know, kind of our crazy performance research, that sort of thing, and arts tech work with a much broader community. For me, and I think for the center writ large, STEAM is just much more than just technology and the arts. It is several things. It is the notion that the integration of disciplines, right, spanning, you know, particularly the sort of arts humanities as well as the techno-scientific, is a foundation for better learning, more engaged, better learning, that we can teach better and learn better when we integrate across those fields. Even more broadly, STEAM for me is the belief that having that diversity of experiences and perspectives provides this relentless source of creativity, right? You know, there's a great quote: creativity is just connecting things. It's not just the light bulb going off over your head. It's seeing something in one domain and perhaps then connecting that to an application in a different domain. So I think this goes way beyond teaching and education and just disciplinary boundaries, that when we start talking about including different perspectives, different life experiences, different, you know, different backgrounds, different upbringings, that is a tremendous source of innovation, right? And we would be not just remiss, right? We are really hurting ourselves by excluding contributions from so many different fields, perspectives, and people, right? Again, you don't just snap your fingers and make that happen. So what we try to do is look at it in a very different, maybe, and very particularly, hopefully a distinctive way. Okay, I don't need to explain to this audience who these people are. In Philly, sometimes I do. Sometimes, oh, I don't know who that is. Not, for the most part, I don't. So, you know, obviously these three and their companies, and of course they're those similar, are pointed to, right, often as our models for innovation, right? This is where the growth is happening. This is where all the innovation, all the great tech, all the new jobs, all the, the big money, that's where it's happening, right? But if tech is going to be our model for innovation, for education, we have a pretty big problem. And again, you're probably familiar with some of these statistics. So this was from a survey of Silicon Valley companies across 177 of them, median reporting in 2016, right? That employees in Silicon Valley companies, and this is not surprising, certainly not atypical, but still, very, very disturbing, that only 2.5% of employees are Black and 5.6% are Latinx. This is, well below, the national demographics, certainly well below participation in other industries as well. In fact, here in Philadelphia, there's a report that came out in 2017 that we were actually the best city for diversity in STEM, right? With a whole 18% of STEM employees that are Black, right? 18%, well, it's a lot better than 2.5, but still, 18%, our city is 42% Black, right? So we all have a long, long way to go. And by the way, in Philly, at least, only 1/3 of STEM employees are women. And I know that in the tech industry, obviously there's enormous disparities along gender as well. So if we're looking at the tech industry as our model, right, that's going to bring along a lot of baggage with it, a lot of challenges, particularly in terms of including everyone's voice. I work in higher education, of course. And so this is, these are the numbers for, sorry, I'm trying to, okay. This is the participation of Blacks in computer science in North America, US and Canada, right? In 2002, and I'm gonna take 2002 and then I'm gonna compare it to 2017, which is one of the more recent years for which we have data. 2002, 3.6% of all computing bachelor's degrees went to Black people, 1.3% of master's degrees, 1.3% of PhDs. And that's a paltry number. It's only 10 PhDs that year. That's fine. There aren't that many PhDs granted in a single year. Zoom ahead to 2017. Here's all the progress that we made, right? Over 15 years, right? Basically the same number of, same percentage of Black bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and PhDs, in fact, percentage went down, right? So when you think about it, in 2017, all the people who were awarded PhD who were Black in computer science could fit around a conference room table, right? And again, here in Philadelphia, that astounds people. I am sure that in other technology centers in New York and San Francisco and Seattle, right? That's crazy. Their PhDs in computing are minted, it seems like every day, and they're just moving in and taking over companies, right? And the fact that, there were only 18 of them, from the Black community in 2017 is, I think, appalling and astounding. So that's higher ed. We obviously still have a lot of work to do there. What about K-12, right? We do a lot, I'm sure a lot of you are in K-12 or do work in K-12, and certainly we're very involved as well. Lots of efforts around maker spaces, maker learning, right? Again, it's a hot new thing. I'm sure many of you get these requests too. We get calls all the time from schools. Hey, we want to start a maker space. What do we do? The first thing I tell them is, well, you can't buy Make Magazine anymore. They went out of business, but don't buy Make Magazine. Several people have done this. This is analysis of all the covers. Actually, this is all the covers from Make Magazine, from its first issue to its very last, right? And you'll notice one thing, right? that first off, gender representation is pretty bad. It was pretty terrible up until 2014, and they started making a little more concerted effort to actually feature more women on their covers. But up through the entire publication history of Make magazine, not a single Black person has ever been on the cover of Make magazine. Right? So let that sink in. You know, they publish 6 a year, and they publish for more than 10 years. That's a lot of magazines, right? There were certainly ample opportunities. But what does that tell you about maker learning and maker culture, right? You know, it's, well, let me put it a very, very different way. So this is sort of the challenge that we face when we're trying to bring learning innovation, right? Things that are obviously that we're, you know, from as a technologist, myself and many of my colleagues are very, very interested in doing, in implementing, in bringing to young people in our region, right? But it comes with a tremendous amount of, not just baggage, it comes with a tremendous amount of bias, right? So, and I will come back to that in a second. I'll give a little more data on that. I prefer to look at this in a very different way. My background's both in technology and in music. And a lot of my projects, as I showed you, touch upon this boundary of music and technology, right? And in music, we have the classical giants, right? We have Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. And I love Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. I was a music major, so of course I love Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. But I don't think anyone would argue that these three individuals, these three white men, are the most influential musicians of 2020. Clearly they are not, right? Our musical culture has evolved over centuries to include many, many different perspectives, genres, ethnicities, and traditions. All you have to do, just look at the Billboard charts. Hopefully you get a sense. I don't know if the video is coming through at all, but all I've done is put the album covers from the top 10 albums every year, or of the decade rather. And over history, slowly but surely, right, we get slightly better representation, more color, literally. And that's not to say that the music industry is fixed. It's definitely not. There are huge disparities there as well, only that it does reflect a broader representation of our society. Right. So how do we get here, right? How, at least there is greater inclusion, certainly among in pop culture. Well, there were, of course, incredible pioneers in, here I'll speak to the music history, right? We had, the giants of jazz, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, right? Who used these, loud brass instruments to create an entirely new sound in an era where there was no amplification. Right? We have the Motown sound, right, which producer Berry Gordy tuned specifically for car radios, the predominant sort of, speakers of the time, to provide a broadly accessible yet very, very distinctive musical experience, right? And of course, we have the pioneers and founders of hip hop who couldn't get into the discos, right, of the 70s, and instead pioneered this very new sound using technology, using tapes, using spinning, but created an entirely new genre that is arguably the most popular in the world today. So now, just imagine for a second, right, a world without these pioneers, a world without jazz, without Motown, without hip hop, right? What would our world look like today? What would our society be like? Right? So this is my big fear, that if we think about it as sort of the classics, the Gates, the Zuckerbergs, the Steve Jobs, right? And follow their pathway to what is currently a fairly exclusionary monoculture of technology. My greatest fear is that will make it less likely, not more likely, less likely for true innovative voices to emerge. Right? That you have to think very, very differently, right? To really propel some of these sorts of societal changes. So how does this inform my work at Drexel and at the Excite Center? I have extraordinary privilege. I work with some amazing colleagues, some amazing people. This is some of our team members who are pursuing research and education activities out of the Excite Center. And we've sort of formed together around this vision of inclusive maker and STEAM learning, right? Chris Emden, who you may have heard of, the last picture on the bottom right, is not at Drexel, but he's at Columbia Teachers College. But he's obviously highly influential, and we're privileged that he's sort of an advisor and mentor to many of our efforts. So how do we put this, how do we actually do research on this and start implementing from this perspective of much greater inclusion in maker and STEAM learning? Well, one of the first things we did is that we did a study. We fortunately got some funding and visited 30 different maker spaces across the country, K-12, all K-12 education maker spaces across the country. And then we wrote this report with our findings called Making Culture. And it's available freely online from our website, or if you go to bit.ly/makingculture, the URL on the bottom right, you can find it there. And we came up with these recommendations. But the biggest sort of finding was that, yes, there are great things happening in maker spaces all around and maker programs throughout the country. But, and it's difficult for me to say these things because the people we encountered are amazing, right? Many of them are, coming back from industry or giving freely of their time, volunteering tremendous hours, for a school or for a program. But what we did find is that there is significant evidence of implicit bias among maker instructors, that they predominantly, and we did this through interviews. We interviewed and then analyzed those interviews for keywords and then counted frequencies of the use of those keywords. And by far, instructors would refer to their male students, their male maker students, as hackers and coders and nerds and things associated with the makerspace. And then they would refer to their female students as girls. Right? And it wasn't even close, really. In terms of term frequency, it was way, way more. So, for us, that just pointed, again, to the significant dangers. I mean, it's not intentional. Most of it is completely unintentional. It's implicit, right? It's an implicit bias. But coming from tech culture, coming from industry, coming from rooms full of men, right? Where they learned some of those maker skills, right? They still propagate the language of exclusion, unfortunately. So we reported on this. We presented this work at South by Southwest EDU last year. And again, the report is freely available online. You can download it and see the data that we've collected. We're going back to South by next month in March to present some follow-up work and how we've taken that research, that work, and how we're implementing those changes here. So a couple of initiatives that I'll point to that we're putting into place, that we've put into place over the past year or 18 months. One of my colleagues, Chris Wright, has a research project, an SF-funded study with other universities in partnership to create sort of a hip-hop approach to computation, to coding and learning. And I'm, again, trying to move the pictures. Apparently, I can't do that. So it's a hip-hop-based approach to exploring computing for culturally sustaining pedagogies, right? That we want to create not just curricula, but spaces where youth, from all backgrounds can come in and not feel that they're walking into a foreign space, that they are welcome, that they are included, and that the program is designed to resonate with their cultural experiences, not having to adapt to a different cultural experience. Some of the activities that we've already implemented and begun, we've done programs around sneaker design, sneaker materials, where both off-campus and on-campus, this is actually integrated into some of our K-12 programs now, where they not only design sneakers, I mean, it's such a big part of youth culture these days, what shoes are you wearing? They actually get to then take those shoes apart, right? We actually sometimes cut them in half and they can see all the layers, all the materials, and then sort of design their own modifications to those shoes. We do We do projects where we bring together, again, sort of arts and technology. So on the upper right, that's our middle school program with a local middle school, Science Leadership Academy Middle School. They come in once a week to learn basic robotics by building musical devices, self-playing musical instruments that they then incorporate into a performance. And the bottom right is our high school program, Summer Music Technology, which I describe as School of Rock meets Robot Camp. That it's they build tech, they build effects, they perform songs, they build robots that play music. The final day, the showcase, it's a performance extravaganza. It's really, really one of the best days of the year for us. Our largest implementation, our largest program for K-12 right now is it's our Young Dragons Summer STEAM program. This is a 6-week middle school camp. All brand new STEAM programs, STEAM curricula that we built from the ground up. And then we formed this in partnership with the Malcolm Jenkins Foundation. Malcolm is, he's a football star. He's a Pro Bowl safety for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's a Super Bowl champion, incredible human being. He is also one of the leading advocates for social justice and criminal justice reform. So you may have heard of him or certainly seen him. He's one of the founders of the NFL's Players Coalition, which is advocating for social justice through the league. So his foundation helped us start this camp, which started as first 1 week and then 2 weeks, 4 weeks, now it's 6 weeks. It is offered at no cost to all residents of the Promise Zone. And last year we had 75 campers, average attendance per day over 50. And again, brand new, all design, custom designed STEAM programs that with cultural inclusion in mind. So we do things like the sneaker engineering. We've done sports science. We do obviously music making, music technology, beat making. We've done visual arts and geometry. And we try to make it as cutting edge a STEAM camp as possible. What I tell people is that this camp isn't available anywhere else at any price, right? So it's the same goals and learning outcomes as you'd find in a STEAM camp, I think, in Silicon Valley, or certainly in, suburban Philadelphia, or, any sort of more affluent area. But designed for our neighborhood, designed for the kids of West Philadelphia. So we're very proud of it. I'll show you a very short video clip from this program. Hopefully it'll come through. Okay, the rest are just testimonials and stuff. I hope that video came through, and certainly if not, it's on our website, and you can probably get a clearer view of what's happening there. So, we love this program. We obviously put a lot of time and resourcing into it, and then we revise it every year with new programming. So, because we have neighborhood residents who come back year after year after year, and so they get to experience something new, something different. Let's see, I'm gonna zoom through a couple other things because I know I'm starting to run low on time. This is a photo of our Action for Early Learning team. I mentioned this many slides ago as part of our timeline. There is a much deeper story to this that I won't be able to really get into, but Philadelphia is one of the first cities that passed a beverage tax, a soda and beverage tax, that was specifically used to fund universal pre-K in the city. So we are actually starting to see the fruits of that now. So they support this initiative, Action for Early Learning, which is helping increase the number and quality of early childhood care providers in all neighborhoods, but here particularly in West Philadelphia. I highlight them not only for their great work, they are doing amazing work. They're actually based within the Excite Center. right? We're not just a place where tech and innovation labs are, right? We host groups like this. We actually host a whole team from our University Community Partnerships office because we strongly believe in the cross-pollination of those efforts. I can't predict where the next collaboration will happen or what the new idea might be, but we love having those opportunities, right? And we think we're a pretty unique space that enables that. Most universities, even if you have a civic engagement office, it's usually very, very separate from, let's say, the tech innovation and the robots and that sort of thing. So we bring those worlds together. So yeah, this is from one of our daycare providers in the neighborhood. Right? Another program that started here at the Excite Center is what we call the Community Business Collaborative. This is working with small business partners in the neighborhood. Many of these are, family-owned businesses, maybe handed down even generations. We're talking, stores, small service businesses, hardware stores is, one of our first partners. We build websites for them. So we help them get online. A lot of them don't have websites, don't have much of a digital presence. And of course, in a city, certainly around a college campus, if you don't have a digital presence, you basically don't exist. So we help businesses and organizations, community organizations, get online that way. Okay, in my last few minutes here, I'm just gonna paint the story where we are and where we're going. All right, this is not happening just in a vacuum. If nothing else, I want to sort of reinforce how at the university, we are trying to do this holistically, right? It is a big city, it's a big institution. We take our responsibility as an anchor institution very, very seriously. So as we pursue new development, right, we can actually help steer things in a less gentrifying and more inclusive direction. So there's this big development project we call Schuylkill Yards, and Schuylkill is the big river that goes down the middle of Philadelphia. What Schuylkill Yards is, it's a $6 billion real estate development effort right around the university, where we're looking at, so right where the river is, that's sort of the center of Philadelphia. This highlighted region, that's the promise zone, right? What Schuylkill Yards is starting to do now, I mean, construction has started, but they're going to transform particularly the area right around the river into that. So again, the neighbors, right, the longtime residents of the Promise Zone are seeing this happening, right? They're seeing all of this development, all this investment, all this money, right, going into this. And our goal is to ensure that growth benefits the community. We actually have put in, sorry, it's not our money. It's a private developer, but it's a lot of it's university land. That's how we were able to put some steering and some stipulations around this. So they do have an agreement to try to hire local residents first, to look for, in terms of procurement and providers, also to look locally first. And then, again, this is going to be a much harder lift, right? We are trying to build the pipelines and the agreements so that as new businesses move in, that the positions that are created, the jobs that are created, are as inclusive as possible. That they fully consider members of the immediate neighborhood and community. It's hard to impose that. I mean, there's actually legally, I don't think we can, but that's something we're really strongly arguing for and passionate about. So that's what's happening. This is what's happening right on our campus, right? And this is now the 20-year plan, right? That includes a neighborhood school, which I mentioned very briefly. Science Leadership Academy, if you're unfamiliar with them, they're one of the premier magnet schools in the country, founded by Chris Lehman, and who's the founding principal and the leader of Science Leadership Academy schools, because now there are multiple schools. So they helped us begin a middle school in West Philadelphia. It's a brand new school. It's a neighborhood catchment. It's not a magnet, but bringing along sort of inquiry-based, project-based learning as the primary neighborhood school in our area. So we've partnered with them on many things. I mentioned, this is a rendering of the new building that they're going to be moving into in about a year and a half. They just broke ground recently on this. but that will be the hub, and it's a university partnered school. So again, in terms of research, researcher practitioner partnerships, this is a wonderful intersection, an opportunity for us and for many other of our colleagues, not to use students as lab rats at all. We do not do that. This is working in partnership with the instructors, educators there to try to improve outcomes on all fronts, right? Some of that will be research-based. Well, all of it will be research-based, but it's not that we fly in, drop a bunch of surveys, and then pick them up 2 weeks later, right? We don't do that. A lot of people used to do that. I'm gonna skip through these very quickly. And then the most recent thing, and the thing I'll sort of finish off with, is when I talked a lot about the Promise Zone, we were able to then get a Promise Neighborhood project from the Department of Education to improve outcomes in the Promise Zone in West Philadelphia. So this is a pretty large Department of Education initiative to improve cradle to career outcomes in this West Philadelphia area, right? So targeting lifelong literacy, behavioral health, and trauma-informed family and community supports. This project is helping support some of our initiatives. I'll just highlight one or two as I close here. This is one of my favorite projects, Black Girls Steaming Through Dance. They're working with middle school girls in the neighborhood, integrating coding, algorithmic thinking, and dance. They do a lot with wearables. They design their own outfits for performance, and then they do a recital at the end of their project. So this is a highly interdisciplinary collaboration spanning the dance department, computing, product design, and the Excite Center. Our latest initiative here at the Excite Center is a new lab that we established. They've branded themselves as the ILLIST Lab, the Informal Learning, Linking, Engineering, Science, and Technology Lab. This is led by my colleagues Chris Wright and Kareem Edouard. One of their first funded projects, again, through the Promise Neighborhoods, is that we're bringing in students from West Philly High School, bringing in cohorts of 10 to 15 students at a time. They're learning not just maker skills. They are learning some maker skills. They are helping us reimagine and re-envision our makerspace to be fully inclusive. Obviously for different backgrounds, different cultures, but also for different interests, right? Makerspaces can be incredibly daunting places for someone who is not into robots or not into woodworking or 3D printing, right? But I think we know that there's enormous potential for making to be a pathway to much deeper learning, more engaged learning in a lot of areas. So we're trying to design a space that's not going to exclude a large number of people right up front. So with that, I will close with this. Again, returning to our favorite tech heroes here. Oh, sorry, I'm looking, just making sure I have all my notes here. So I'll return to these three. So, my initial point of, if we follow the tech industry and tech leaders as the model, right, which again, I would argue has created mostly an exclusionary monoculture to date, right? We will miss some of these opportunities. We will miss maybe the most important of these opportunities. That if you kind of take the prior blueprints of what is a makerspace and just try to implement that, right? It's missing so much, right? It has blinders to other possibilities and certainly other challenges and needs. So again, my greatest fear is that world without hip hop, without jazz, without Motown. And my fear is that that's what sort of tech and ed tech are giving us right now, right? So, I like to liken these three to these three, right? They are the classical giants, right? But if you insist that everyone has to follow their path, then we're not going to get those breakthroughs. We're not going to find, the innovators who led to jazz, Motown, and hip hop. So don't think of Jobs, Zuckerberg, and Gates as aspirational models, right? If it helps you, maybe you can think of them like this. Equivalent to the classical giants of old, right? Influencers, but not determinants, right? So keep that in mind, and hopefully you can, you know, if nothing else, you know, your eyes will be burned in with these images. So thank you for listening. If you have time, I'm happy to stick around and take some questions and discuss. Thank you.